Hey guys, tonight we drift back nearly 1,000 years to a place where silence hums louder than any city street and the scent of wet stone mixes with something unexpectedly cozy, warm barley and yeast. You find yourself walking through a monastery courtyard at dawn. The air is cool, damp, and the bells have just finished ringing the morning prayers. Somewhere, a rooster tries to interrupt the holiness, and you can't help but smile. You're here to discover how medieval monks managed to brew beer. Yes, beer, without getting in trouble for enjoying it. And honestly, given how strict the church could be, that's a pretty miraculous trick. You probably wouldn't survive this, not because of the fasting or the vows of silence, but because even the strongest coffee wouldn't save you from their schedule. Wake up at 2 a.m., pray, chant, work, repeat. And through it all, no Spotify playlists, just Gregorian chants and the gentle burble of fermenting ale. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The monastery around you is older than most countries. The walls breathe history. You can almost feel the hands that built them, calloused, faithful, probably grumbling quietly under their breath. You follow the narrow path leading from the chapel to a low stone building with a wooden door marked with a simple carving of a jug. This is where the monks brew their beer, though they'd never call it that. To them, it's liquid bread, a drink to nourish the body and humble the soul. The first monk you meet doesn't greet you with words. He just nods, his tonsure reflecting a shaft of morning light. You notice the faint smell of roasted malt clinging to his robe. He hands you a rough wooden scoop and gestures to a pile of grain. You're part of the process now. You toss the grain into a great vat where hot water steams up like incense. The air fills with sweetness, earthy and comforting. Historians still argue whether medieval monks truly invented modern beer. Some claim they merely refined what peasants were already doing. Others believe monasteries were the first organized breweries. But one thing's certain, you're standing in one of history's earliest labs of flavor, faith, and fermentation. As the mash bubbles, the monk beside you begins to hum, low and steady. The sound blends with the soft crackle of the fire beneath the vat. It's hypnotic. Brewing here isn't just work, it's prayer by another name. Each stir of the spoon, each hour of waiting is a quiet offering. You glance around the room. Everything is practical, humble. Barrels lined like obedient monks, clay pots stacked in corners, a single window letting in a blade of gold light. There's no decoration, no indulgence, just purpose. You might almost believe the monks brewed only for sustenance, but the tiny smiles they exchange over a well-fermented batch say otherwise. A mainstream historical fact slides into your thoughts. By the 9th century, monasteries across Europe had become centers of agriculture and craftsmanship, including brewing. They brewed for pilgrims, for the sick, and yes, for themselves during fasting periods when solid food was off limits. But liquid bread was perfectly fine. Clever, right? You can almost hear the theological loophole stretching. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some monasteries actually recorded beer as pittance, meaning extra kindness, a small mercy added to the daily ration. Imagine telling your modern diet app that your extra kindness today was a pint of ale. The monk hands you a ladle and lets you taste a sip of the warm brew. It's thick, slightly sour, and not quite ready, but it fills you with a gentle warmth. You realize how valuable this would have been in a cold world where clean water could make you sick. And that's the other thing. You couldn't safely drink water in most medieval towns. Streams ran beside latrines, wells mixed with runoff, and even the word fresh was a gamble. So beer wasn't just indulgence, it was survival. The monks knew it, and so did everyone else. A breeze sneaks through the open doorway, carrying the smell of damp moss and barley. The monk gestures for you to follow him out to the cloister garden. The sound of dripping water from the fountain echoes softly under the stone arches. Bees hum lazily over the herbs, sage, thyme, and a few hop plants climbing the wall. You smile at the idea that something once called a weed became one of beer's defining ingredients. Historians still argue whether hops were widely used by monks before the 11th century. Some say they preferred grut, a mixture of herbs and spices that flavored the beer. Others claim certain abbeys experimented early with hops for preservation. You can imagine a monk secretly adding a handful, pretending it was for the Lord's longevity. You pause near the fountain, watching the reflection of the sky ripple with each drop. It's easy to see how brewing fits into monastic life. It required discipline, patience, and timing, the same virtues cultivated in prayer. You imagine them kneeling in the chapel 1 hour, then stirring barley the next. For them, the sacred and the mundane blurred together like foam over the rim of a mug. A younger monk jogs past carrying a bucket, muttering something about Brother Gerard burning the mash again. You catch the amused glances of the others. Even in a place devoted to divine order, mistakes still happen. It's oddly comforting. As you walk deeper into the cloister, you pass a cellar entrance. The air that seeps out is cool, earthy, and tinged with yeast. You step inside, the stone steps groaning softly beneath your feet. Barrels line the walls like ancient guardians. Each is marked with a chalk cross. The monk explains that every batch begins with a blessing, but sometimes, despite all prayers, the beer spoils. When that happens, they simply shrug and say, perhaps God had other plans for that yeast. You can't help but grin. Somewhere between theology and thermodynamics, medieval monks learned to perfect brewing without ever naming it science. A cat darts out from behind a barrel, tail high, clearly the unofficial cellar guardian. The monk tells you they keep cats not only for companionship, but to protect the grain from mice. You reach down to scratch its head, and it purrs, unimpressed by your historical awe. The monk finally speaks, his voice calm and dry. Beer reminds us that waiting is holy. You realize that every step in the brewing process, malting, mashing, fermenting, is about time, patience, and trust. It's like a prayer you can drink. You lean against a barrel, feeling its faint vibration. Somewhere inside, invisible colonies of yeast are turning sugar into spirit. The process is quiet, but alive. You can't help but feel a little reverence for the unseen work. Tiny miracles happening in darkness. Outside, the bells ring again. The monks move in silent rhythm toward the chapel, their robes swaying like waves. You follow, your thoughts as hazy as fermenting ale. As you walk, you realize that the boundary between sin and survival, between indulgence and devotion, has always been thinner than we think. You glance once more toward the brewery door before it closes. The last thing you see is the warm glow of firelight over copper kettles and the gentle rise of steam that looks suspiciously like incense. Maybe, in their own quiet way, these monks found the perfect blend of heaven and earth in a mug.
The next morning arrives before you're ready, with a bell that could wake the dead, or at least a very tired monk. You sit up on a straw mattress in a small guest room, the kind generously offered to travelers, pilgrims, and occasionally overly curious time-traveling narrators. The stone walls sweat with dawn mist, and you can hear chanting already rising from the chapel. Somewhere below, someone's stoking a fire. You can smell it, a mix of ash, damp wool, and that now familiar scent of roasted grain. You pull on your borrowed robe and shuffle through the corridor, the hem brushing cold stone. Every footstep echoes like you're part of a rhythm older than language. You pass a few monks, each nodding politely but saying nothing, not because they're rude, just because silence is a kind of prayer here. You, on the other hand, are still working on the no talking before breakfast discipline. When you step into the brewery again, it's alive with quiet motion. Copper kettles glint in the candlelight, and a few monks move with unhurried grace. No shouting, no rush, just soft clinks of metal, the whoosh of a wooden paddle stirring, and the low hiss of steam. This is the monastery's heartbeat. You join Brother Aelred, who greets you with a faint smile that could mean welcome or don't mess up the mash again. He motions you closer to the table where several clay jars sit, sealed with beeswax. He scrapes one open, and the air fills with a tangy, fruity aroma. Yeast, he whispers, though he doesn't really know it. He calls it God's dust, the mysterious life that makes the brew bubble. Sacred brewing secrets, indeed. He lets you sniff the jar, and it smells halfway between bread dough and an orchard in summer. He gestures reverently. This isn't chemistry, it's faith in a jar. You ask, in your head, how they discovered this invisible magic. He shrugs, as if to say, we just noticed the bubbles and thanked heaven. Historians still argue whether monks intentionally cultivated yeast strains or simply reused residue from previous batches. Some suggest they had a proto-scientific instinct, cleaning and feeding the residue carefully. Others think it was pure luck wrapped in ritual. You realize that in a world without microscopes, calling it divine intervention was a perfectly reasonable peer review process. Brother Aelred leads you to a shelf of small linen sacks. Inside are herbs, wormwood, rosemary, yarrow, sometimes even bog myrtle. Before hops became standard, monks seasoned beer with these earthy, bitter plants. He pinches a bit between his fingers and lets you smell. It's both medicinal and strangely appetizing. This one, he says softly, keeps away evil spirits. You're not sure if he means demonic or microbial, but either way, you're on board. A mainstream fact filters through your mind. Some monasteries became renowned for their Groot beer, herbal ales brewed without hops, tailored to local tastes and even local ailments. These brews weren't just for celebration. They were medicine, nourishment, and hydration wrapped into one. A pint a day kept the plague away, allegedly. The quirky detail comes when Brother Aelred reaches for a cracked leather book filled with brewing notes. The handwriting is so dense it looks like spider tracks. You lean closer and realize it's coded, symbols instead of words, deliberate misspellings. Some monks protected their recipes like royal secrets, worried that rival abbeys might borrow their blessed formula, the medieval version of password protection. As you stir the mixture with a wooden paddle, you notice how the rhythm feels familiar, almost musical. The monks chant softly as they work, their voices rising and falling with the steam. It's hypnotic. Brewing is not just about ingredients, it's about intention. Every step has a prayer attached, a small plea for balance and purity. One monk begins humming a psalm about patience. You wonder if that's deliberate irony, given that beer takes weeks to ferment. Still, there's something deeply peaceful about it, the acceptance that good things take time, and that time itself is holy. You can't help but imagine what modern brewing would look like if people still sang while stirring their tanks. Maybe craft beer would have fewer hipster feuds and more harmony. As the hours pass, Brother Aelred shows you another secret, the water source. He leads you out back to a small spring bubbling beneath a moss-covered arch. It's cold, clear, and surprisingly sweet. We say the water is blessed, he murmurs, but really it just flows from a place no one dares to pollute. You think of medieval towns where chamber pots emptied into rivers, and suddenly this private spring feels like a miracle. Historians still debate whether monastic breweries truly filtered their water intentionally or just lucked into clean sources. Some evidence suggests monks knew that brewing from stagnant water caused illness, even if they didn't understand bacteria. Others argue it was simply a habit born of observation. Either way, the result was the same: safer beer, healthier monks, and a lot fewer stomachaches. Aelred fills a bucket, hands it to you, and together you carry it back to the kettles. The path is lined with worn cobblestones, the air buzzing with bees. The monastery garden grows everything from cabbage to chamomile. Every herb has its use, in medicine or beer. You spot mint and sage, which both, Aelred explains, make the ale taste like clean thoughts. You laugh quietly. He smiles, like that's the right answer. Back in the brewery, another monk, Brother Peter, round-faced and cheerful, hands you a mug of finished beer from an earlier batch. It's darker than you expect, almost like liquid bread pudding. You sip carefully. The flavor is deep and earthy with a hint of smoke. You nod approvingly. Peter grins, whispering, "It's the St. Bartholomew batch. We bless it twice, so it behaves." You're halfway through the mug when the abbot himself steps in. The room stills immediately. He's tall, severe, and clearly the kind of man who could detect fun from 50 paces. Everyone bows slightly. He inspects the kettles, the barrels, even the spoons. His gaze lands on your mug. You freeze. Peter subtly takes it back, like a magician hiding a rabbit. The abbot nods and moves on, apparently satisfied. When he's gone, the tension breaks. Aelred sighs. He does not drink, he says quietly, but he blesses the ones who do. You realize how thin the line is between sacred and scandalous in this world. The monks walk it every day, keeping their joy disguised as duty. Aelred wipes his hands and shows you a wooden plaque near the doorway. It lists Latin words, something about moderation, humility, and gratitude. You recognize one phrase, Benedictus qui moderatus bibit. Blessed is he who drinks moderately. That's the key, you think. The monks didn't brew beer to party. They brewed it to practice balance. You stand in the doorway, the late morning light catching dust motes like tiny halos. The smell of malt clings to everything, even the walls. You feel like you've learned a spell more than a recipe. Before you leave, Aelred hands you a small piece of barley wrapped in cloth. To remind you, he says, that patience makes sweetness. You nod, pocket it, and as you walk away, you can still hear the rhythmic stir of paddles and the faint echo of chanting. Secrets brewed in silence.
The bell rings again, low and patient, and you find yourself outside the brewery, walking toward the small stream that snakes along the monastery wall. It looks innocent enough, silver water rippling over pebbles, a dragonfly hovering like a tiny saint on patrol. But Brother Peter, who's guiding you today, shakes his head gravely. "Never drink from that," he warns, tapping the water with a stick as if it might bite back. You crouch beside him, listening to the murmur of the stream. You notice bits of straw and, less appealingly, something that looks suspiciously like mud but probably isn't just mud. You realize why the monks trust their own beer more than the local water. God's plan, Peter says with a chuckle, was that water becomes beer first. He's not wrong. Across medieval Europe, the rivers that once gave life to villages had turned into open sewers. Towns poured waste directly into them, animals waded freely, and people downstream just shrugged and scooped it up again. You'd think someone would have caught on sooner, but without microscopes or germ theory, no one blamed the water. They blamed everything else, the stars, witches, or the occasional unlucky toad. You dip a finger in the stream and imagine what it would have been like to drink from it after a long day in the fields. Probably refreshing for about 6 hours, until the stomach cramps began. So when monks brewed beer, they weren't chasing pleasure, they were chasing safety. Brewing meant boiling the water, killing off invisible dangers before anyone knew those dangers existed. Historians still argue whether this boil for purity was conscious hygiene or just a side effect of the brewing process. Some say monks noticed that beer drinkers stayed healthier than those who drank water, while others believe they simply followed tradition without realizing the science behind it. Either way, their choice kept entire communities alive. Brother Peter gestures for you to follow him toward the watermill. The wheel creaks as it turns, lifting the morning light into glimmering arcs. You step closer, and the mist cools your face. The monks use this mill not only for grinding barley, but for drawing water into the brewery. It's a smart setup. Gravity does half the work. "We say the wheel prays without ceasing," Peter jokes.
You imagine a saint with very wet feet. Inside the mill house, the air is filled with dust and the rhythmic rumble of stone on grain. The smell is nutty, warm, and familiar. Peter runs his hands through the floury malt, his fingertips coated in pale powder. You see, we trust this water because it becomes food. He means it literally. Once boiled and mixed with grain, water transforms from threat into nourishment. A mainstream historical fact slides into your mind. In many parts of Europe, including England and Germany, the average medieval person, monk or layman, drank between 1 and 3 liters of small beer daily. It wasn't strong. It was liquid sustenance. Even children drank it. It was cleaner than water, safer than milk, and tastier than anything else they could afford. But here's the quirky twist. The monks didn't stop there. They developed different grades of beer. Prima melior for guests, secunda for themselves, and tertia for the poor or sick. It's the medieval equivalent of premium, house, and budget brands. You imagine a monk labeling barrels, "For pilgrims only, do not swap." Peter hands you a wooden ladle filled with the first steep of hot mash. "Small beer," he says, "barely stronger than bread." You take a sip. It's tangy, slightly sweet, and feels like something between oatmeal and hope. It doesn't make you drunk, but it fills you with warmth, the way tea does on a rainy day. Outside, clouds gather above the hills. Rain begins to patter against the stone roof. You and Peter take shelter beneath the arch, watching droplets splash into the stream. He tells you about the monastery's early years, when sickness swept through nearby villages. He says softly, "We gave them barrels, beer, not sermons. It saved more than prayer did." There's a silence after that, the kind that hums with meaning. You imagine tired peasants trudging up the hill, pale and weak, leaving later with a jug of safe liquid comfort. The monks must have felt proud. Quietly so. Brewing wasn't indulgence, it was mercy in a mug. Historians still debate whether monasteries truly understood the medicinal properties of beer, or if its benefits were coincidental. Some writings describe beer as strength for the weary, while others treat it like medicine against melancholy. You decide both might be true. After all, beer doesn't just heal the body, it soothes the soul. Peter leads you back through the cloister garden. The rain makes everything smell alive. Wet thyme, crushed mint, damp stone. You spot a barrel collecting runoff, and he nods toward it. He says, "We never waste rain. God provides the rinse." You notice the system. Gutters lead to cisterns. Cisterns feed the brewery. It's a smart setup. Gravity does half the work. You pass a young novice trying to carry 2 overflowing buckets. He stumbles, spills half, then freezes as the abbot appears in the doorway. The poor boy bows his head in dread, but the abbot simply mutters, "Water is for sinners, beer redeems," and walks away. You nearly choke trying not to laugh. As you wander back toward the brewing hall, the floor glistens with a thin film of condensation. Steam from boiling wort rises into the rafters, making the air shimmer. You can hear bubbling from the cauldrons, soft, content, like the monastery itself is breathing. Brother Peter points to a copper pot where the liquid rolls and froths. That, he says, is the only time water confesses its sins. You grin, realizing he's more poet than monk. He adds, "When it stops boiling, it's forgiven." In a way, the beer becomes purified twice, once by fire, once by faith. Each batch begins with a prayer and ends with a blessing. You can almost see how the monks reconcile it with their vows. The process itself is sacred, a meditation on transformation. Even the yeast's invisible work feels miraculous. As the afternoon deepens, you sit by the doorway with a mug of cooled wort. The rain has stopped, and sunlight filters through the mist like melted gold. You can hear distant chanting again, echoing off the cloister walls. Each note rises and falls in time with the gentle drip from the eaves. A stray dog trots into the courtyard, tail wagging, and Peter tosses him a crust of bread soaked in beer. Even beasts prefer it, he says fondly. You wonder if medieval pets had their own preferred brands. Probably St. Bernard's brew. The dog curls up by the warm stone, snoring almost instantly. You take another sip and realize that the monastery's secret isn't just that beer kept them safe, it kept them sane. In a world of uncertainty, famine, and plague, this humble drink was stability itself. The sun sinks lower, painting the courtyard in honey light. Peter looks out toward the horizon. He says, "We brew because water remembers what we do to it. Beer forgets." You turn that over in your mind as the shadows lengthen. Maybe that's why people still raise glasses centuries later, to forget gently, not fiercely.
You stand before a wide, low trough carved from oak, its rim sticky with the ghost of countless brews past. The air hums with quiet life. You can almost hear it breathing. This is where the miracle begins. The invisible art of fermentation, the patient heartbeat of a monastery's rhythm. Tonight, your role is simple. You wait, you stir, and you let faith do what science won't name for another 700 years. The monk beside you, Brother Odo, gestures reverently at the frothy surface. "The Lord sends the bubbles," he says, his eyes gleaming. You nod solemnly, even though you know it's really the yeast, the tiny wild things drifting in from open windows, feasting on grain sugars like microscopic pilgrims on a holy journey. Still, you can't quite deny that it feels divine. Fermentation here is more than chemistry. It's a prayer in slow motion. You stir the mash clockwise because that's how the sun moves across the heavens. You hum a psalm because noise keeps demons and fruit flies at bay. The room is warm, the scent sharp with malt, and your thoughts start to drift, melting into the rhythm of drip, stir, breathe. The yeast begins its quiet rebellion, transforming sweetness into alcohol and carbon dioxide. You watch the bubbles rise, like a congregation of tiny souls ascending. The sound is hypnotic, a soft hiss, a burble, a fizz. It's as if the beer itself is whispering secrets you're not quite holy enough to understand. You reach for the wooden paddle again, slowly turning the thick liquid. A light foam forms at the edges, glistening in the torchlight. It's oddly mesmerizing, part science experiment, part meditation. You realize why monks say brewing teaches humility. Once the ingredients are mixed, the rest is surrendered. You can't force fermentation any more than you can rush enlightenment. And that's the thing about patience. It's the real yeast in the monastic soul. Historians still argue whether monks brewed beer for religious devotion or practical survival, but you suspect it was both. When you live cloistered from the world, each day shaped by bells and prayer, waiting becomes its own form of worship. Watching beer ferment for a week? That's just another vigil. As the scent thickens, you notice something strange. The monks treat the vats like altars. They blast the liquid before sealing it, sometimes even naming the batch after a saint. There's St. Benedict's brew, pale and mild, St. Columbanus, dark and heavy, and legend says one unlucky experiment called St. Flatulus, a name earned for obvious reasons. Humor is rare in this place, but beer brings it out. The froth rises higher now, a crown of bubbles trembling like breath on glass. You can feel the room grow warmer, not from fire, but from the fermentation itself, an alchemy of life and heat. It's both eerie and comforting. Brother Odo murmurs, "It is alive." You don't doubt it. Fact check, because even in your half-dream state, you like to know what's real. Medieval monks were, indeed, among the first to master controlled fermentation in Europe. They noticed that certain batches turned out better when brewed near old wooden vats. The yeast, though invisible, had made a home there. The more they reused those vessels, the more consistent their beer became. A kind of early microbial inheritance, centuries before anyone said lactobacillus out loud. Quirky tidbit for you. Some monasteries believed particular strains of yeast were guardian spirits. They literally talked to the foam, offering prayers to keep the brew from souring. Modern brewers might call that superstition. Monks would call it customer service for the divine. As you lean over the vat, the smell shifts, sweet grain giving way to sharp tang. The transformation is underway. The yeast are dying now, suffocating in the alcohol they've made, tiny martyrs of their own creation. The bubbles slow, then settle. You glimpse your reflection on the liquid surface, warped and gold-tinged. Maybe it's the torchlight, or maybe you really are glowing. You close your eyes and listen. Outside, a bell tolls Compline, the last prayer before bed. The monks shuffle quietly, leaving the vats to rest overnight. You follow, carrying with you that sense of warmth and quiet creation. The beer will need days, maybe weeks, to become what it's meant to be. Waiting again. Always waiting. You think of the yeast in the dark, working without complaint, transforming hardship into sweetness. You wonder if that's what faith really is, doing your part, unseen, trusting that something miraculous will rise. Historians still argue whether medieval beer was truly safer than water or just less likely to make you cry. What's certain is that monks perfected brewing long before hygiene science existed. By boiling the mash, they killed most harmful bacteria without knowing what bacteria were. A happy accident wrapped in ritual and rhythm. You stretch your arms, feeling the heat of the day slip away. The smell of malt lingers in your robe, earthy and faintly sweet. You imagine the beer cooling in the wooden barrels, whispering itself into being. There's peace in that, patience, with purpose. Brother Odo returns to check the lid, his face soft with candlelight. "It is alive," he says. His voice is barely above a whisper, reverent as a prayer. You nod, though you both know tomorrow's brew won't be ready for days. It's just his way of saying good night. As you leave the brewery, the night air greets you with a cool touch. Somewhere, an owl hoots. The stars shimmer above the monastery roof, distant and steady. You take a deep breath and realize you're oddly content, partly from the lingering scent of yeast, partly from the thought that right now, hundreds of unseen living things are finishing your work for you. You smile. Brewing is basically teamwork with microbes. And in this silent place, where the hours stretch like melted wax, even that feels sacred.
You wake before the sun, as usual, and the bell calls you from a light, uneasy sleep. The monastery feels different this morning. Still quiet, still cloistered, but somehow more alive. You shuffle along the stone corridors toward the brewery, feeling the familiar coolness against your feet. Today, you will follow the rhythm of bells and barrels through the monks' daily rituals, learning how every movement, every pause, and every stir aligns with both spiritual and practical order. Brother Anselm greets you at the door with a nod that almost hides a smirk. "Ready for the first lesson?" he whispers, though the concept of lessons here is more of an art than instruction. You're guided to the first vat, still half bubbling from yesterday's ferment, its aroma sharp and slightly sweet. The monks have already begun their careful inspection, checking the foam, the temperature, and the scent. Even in such quietude, there's an unspoken hierarchy of attention. Each task is small, measured, and precise, a choreography designed to balance devotion and productivity. You follow him to the schedule board, a simple wooden panel with carved hours marked by bells. Work, prayer, meals, sleep, they all flow seamlessly, overlapping with brewing duties. The day seems impossibly long in hours, but fleeting in tasks. each moment containing both meaning and discipline. It is fascinating to see how the monk's day revolves around rhythm, not rush. Even the act of brewing, which could easily be chaotic, becomes part of a gentle cadence, almost like a slow dance with wooden paddles and fermenting grains. Historians still argue whether this strict scheduling was purely spiritual or also pragmatic, designed to prevent mistakes in the brewing process. Either way, you can't help but admire the efficiency. There's a magic in structure. Every step is predetermined, yet adaptable, a living routine that sustains both body and soul. As the morning advances, you see the monks measure ingredients with meticulous care. Barley is scooped, weighed, and rinsed. Hops are sprinkled gently, almost ceremoniously. You learn the subtle difference between stirring clockwise and counterclockwise. The first honoring the sun, the second perhaps the moon or some forgotten custom passed down through generations. Even the placement of barrels along the floor seems intentional, aligning with airflow, temperature, and perhaps the alignment of some celestial body. Quirky tidbit, some abbeys had secret fermentation corners where yeast was preserved from previous batches. The monks whispered to it, claimed blessings would help it thrive, and even offered a small portion of their daily bread to ensure its loyalty. The practice sounds absurd now, but in a world without understanding microbiology, faith and habit were the same thing. You follow Brother Anselm to a small bench where novices prepare the next batch of wort. Their hands are deft and careful, yet each face is drawn with concentration, as if they are conducting an orchestra of invisible life. You scoop a handful of grain and feel its rough texture under your fingers, warm from pre-soaking. Steam rises from the barrel, curling like smoke from incense, carrying scents that feel familiar, almost comforting. The midday bell tolls, calling the monks to silent prayer. You watch as they pause mid-task, hands hovering over wooden paddles or sacks of malt. The stillness is more than ritual. It's a deep exhalation, a pause to remember purpose. Even brewing becomes a form of devotion. You realize the same hands that stir grain, check temperature, and tend to yeast also make the sign of the cross, bow, and whisper thanks. The intertwining of work and worship is seamless, like notes in a gentle hymn. Historians still debate whether such meticulous attention to detail in brewing was meant to honor God or simply ensure consistency in taste and safety. Perhaps both truths coexisted comfortably. You begin to understand that every scoop, stir, and check is simultaneously functional and spiritual. The monks manage both the liquid in the barrel and the rhythm of their day, a duality that creates harmony from effort. Lunch arrives in the form of a simple loaf, a chunk of cheese, and a cup of thin ale. You eat with the novices, noticing how food and drink are measured, deliberate, and shared. Even mealtime has its rituals. A portion goes to a traveling pilgrim, another to a sick monk, and the remainder is for the workman, the brewer, the learner, you included. Every act is balanced, purposeful, quiet. As the afternoon settles, you follow Brother Anselm to inspect the fermenting barrels again. You notice the subtle changes, the rise in foam, the shift in scent, the soft hiss of escaping gas. Each observation is both scientific and meditative. You realize the patience required is not only for fermentation, but also for self-discipline. Brewing is a mirror of the monastic life, small, precise, attentive, and gentle. A humorous note interrupts your thoughts. Brother Anselm taps the side of a barrel and mutters, "If only the yeast had tongues, they would gossip about our prayers." You laugh quietly, appreciating the small human touch in such a solemn environment. The monk's humor is quiet, understated, and tucked between moments of ritual, like secret herbs hidden in the mash. As the sun dips lower,
casting long shadows over the courtyard, the rhythm of the day winds down. The last stirring is done. Tools are cleaned, ingredients stored, and the fermenting vats are sealed. You feel a soft satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment born not of speed, but of care. You've glimpsed the delicate balance between devotion, discipline, and patience. The art of a monastic life, lived slowly, deliberately, and thoughtfully. Finally, as evening descends, the bells ring for vespers. You follow the monks into the chapel, carrying with you the smells, the warmth, and the quiet joy of a day spent immersed in sacred craft. Outside, the moonlight casts silver lines across the cloister, and you feel a gentle, almost tangible sense of peace. This rhythm, the gentle beat of faith, fermentation, and patience, lingers with you, a quiet echo to carry into sleep.
The morning sun creeps lazily over the monastery walls, spilling golden light across dew-soaked stone and tangled herb gardens. You trudge along the familiar cobblestone path, the soft crunch of gravel beneath your feet punctuated by the distant clatter of barrels being rolled into place. Today is different. Today, you'll help pour ale for travelers and the poor, learning how the monks' labor reached beyond cloister walls and into the lives of those who had little else. Brother Emmerich greets you at the brewery, his face lined with faint smiles and a hint of mischief that seems appropriate for someone who spends half his life talking to bubbling vats. He gestures toward a small wooden spigot on one of the largest barrels. The ale within has aged a few weeks, its scent deep and earthy, hinting at the herbs and malt that went into it. You watch as he tilts the barrel just enough to let the first amber liquid flow into waiting jugs, each clink sounding like a quiet promise. You carry a jug outside to the courtyard, where a small group of weary travelers waits. The air is crisp, with a faint aroma of wood smoke and moss from the surrounding hills. The monks have already laid out simple bowls of bread, and the traveler's eyes brighten at the sight of the ale. You hand over the first mug, feeling its warmth seep into your fingers. The drink is thin compared to modern standards, yet comforting, nourishing, and surprisingly smooth. Historians still argue whether monastic charity focused more on sustenance or evangelism. But standing here, watching the villagers' content faces, you suspect it was both. The ale feeds the body, and through ritual and blessing, lifts the spirit. A sip passes between hands, gratitude expressed not in words, but in the quiet tilt of a mug. You can feel the sense of community knitting together, small yet profound. A quirky detail catches your attention. Some monasteries designated certain batches of ale as healing brews, mixed with extra herbs like sage or thyme. Pilgrims would seek these out, not because they were stronger, but because folklore suggested they warded off minor ailments, fatigue, or melancholy. You imagine the subtle psychological comfort, the kind that modern studies might call placebo, but in this context, it feels like magic. You follow Brother Emmerich to the storage room, where dozens of jugs are stacked in orderly rows. He shows you the markings, some for guests, some for the sick, others for distribution to neighboring villages. The system is meticulous, almost militaristic, yet gentle in execution. Each jug has a purpose, each measure is considered, and each pour is deliberate. The act of giving becomes a ritual in itself, a ceremony of generosity conducted with no audience other than those who benefit. The monks' schedules allow for such acts because their lives are built on discipline. Their day flows like a river: prayer, work, brewing, charity, reflection. Even the simple act of pouring ale carries layers of meaning. As you lift a mug to a traveler's lips, you feel the rhythm of centuries behind your actions, a silent echo of those who performed the same gestures long before you arrived. A mainstream fact: by the 12th century, European monasteries were central hubs of hospitality. Pilgrims, the sick, and even travelers with no faith were offered bread, ale, and shelter. Ale was considered safe hydration and a source of nutrition, especially in a world where water could carry disease. You realized that the monks' charity was both pragmatic and spiritual, a tangible extension of their faith. Humor, naturally, is not absent. As you pour, a young boy trips over a jug and spills a few drops. Brother Emmerich shakes his head, chuckling softly. "Even the Lord enjoys a spill now and then," he murmurs. You laugh quietly. The mishap reminds you that life, even monastic life, is rarely perfect. Outside, the sun climbs higher, warming the courtyard. Travelers sip slowly, the warmth of the ale spreading through their chilled limbs. You notice the small gestures, a nod, a whispered thanks, a subtle smile. The monks, though silent, watch from nearby, their pride quiet but evident. You begin to understand the depth of purpose here. Brewing isn't just a craft, it's a conduit for kindness. Historians still debate the scale and impact of monastic charity, but you can see it firsthand. A jug of ale may seem trivial, yet it sustains, comforts, and connects. The monks' careful labor in the brewery translates into subtle social engineering, shaping a network of care that reaches far beyond the stone walls. As the day unfolds, you help refill barrels, wipe down tables, and deliver jugs to those waiting beyond the courtyard gate. Each step feels slow, deliberate, and grounding. You feel a quiet satisfaction in being part of a chain of giving, the gentle rhythm of labor aligning with a deeper, almost spiritual purpose. By afternoon, the courtyard empties, the last of the ale poured, and the monks return to their chores and prayers. You linger, watching the sunlight play over barrels, the faint glimmer of fermented gold catching your eye. It's a simple, mundane beauty, yet profound, a reminder that even in routine, generosity and patience can create small miracles. You pause near a wooden bench, the smell of spent malt and sun-warmed stone mixing in a comforting aroma. It leaves a lingering sense of calm, a reassurance that even small acts, pouring a pint, sharing a loaf, can ripple outward. You think of the unseen hands, the patient yeast, and the care poured into every batch. And in that quiet moment, you realize that brewing and charity are not separate. They're intertwined. Each mug handed over carries faith, discipline, and kindness, a testament to centuries of practice, patience, and devotion.
The monastery wakes slowly, as it always does, to the soft clatter of wooden shutters and the distant tolling of the morning bell. You trudge along the familiar cloister, the damp stone cool beneath your bare feet. Today, the task before you is both practical and quietly exhilarating. Measuring, mashing, and preparing a fresh batch of malted barley for brewing. Each step is a rhythm, a gentle hum, a reminder that patience is as much a craft as the beer itself. Brother Wolfred greets you at the brewing hall with a nod that conveys both instruction and a hint of mischief. Today, he says, we feed the spirit of the grain. You follow him to a low table where sacks of barley await, their husks pale and fragrant. You reach in, letting the rough texture run through your fingers, the faint scent of earth and sun warming your senses. Each grain is a tiny vessel of potential, a promise waiting for water, heat, and yeast to awaken it. You start by measuring carefully, following Wolfred's patient instructions. Too little, and the brew will be thin. Too much, and it could overflow or curdle. Every gesture is slow, deliberate, like a meditation on precision. You notice how the monks' movements are fluid, choreographed almost, as if they are dancing with the grains. Historians still argue whether medieval monks understood why heating the mash produced better beer or if it was purely trial and error. Either way, the consistency achieved through repetition is undeniable. You watch as Brother Wolfred tastes a spoonful of the warm liquid, his eyes closing briefly in appreciation. It's a moment of pure mindfulness, a pause in the continuum of labor. As the morning drifts into midday, the mash is poured into wooden vessels, ready for the next stage of brewing. The room is warm, the air thick with the aroma of malt and early fermentation. You notice how each barrel is labeled carefully with the date, type, and intended purpose. Some are for pilgrims, some for the sick, and others for storage, each batch carrying its own identity and destiny. You move to the side to clean up, wiping down tools and surfaces with wet cloths. Even the act of cleaning feels ceremonial, another form of care, ensuring that future brews will be untainted and the yeast preserved. There's a rhythm to everything here, a deliberate harmony between function and devotion. Brother Wolfred gestures toward a small shelf lined with jars of herbs, wormwood, yarrow, chamomile, and a hint of bog myrtle sit in neat rows. For flavor and blessing, he murmurs. You pinch a bit of wormwood between your fingers, its bitter scent sharp yet invigorating. Herbs, you learn, were more than mere seasoning. They were considered protective, medicinal, even spiritually enhancing. The monk's understanding of plants seems intuitive, almost prescient, long before formal pharmacology existed. A small commotion at the doorway draws your attention. A novice is balancing a jug of hot wort, clearly nervous. He wobbles slightly, and you instinctively reach out to steady him. The liquid doesn't spill. The moment passes. You notice how the monks tolerate minor mishaps with quiet humor, never harshness. Mistakes are part of the process, as much a lesson in patience as any prayer or chant. The afternoon drifts lazily into evening. Sunlight streams through the arched windows, highlighting motes of dust floating like tiny angels in the air. You take a moment to observe the barrels, the rising steam, and the soft murmurs of monks going about their work. It's a world suspended in careful rhythm, where time stretches, yet does not hurry. Every stir, every pour, every breath of fragrant air contributes to the spiritual and practical alchemy of brewing. Quirky detail. Some abbeys reportedly kept the yeast from special batches in small, sacred containers, believing that preserving a particularly successful culture ensured the next brew would also prosper. You smile at the thought of medieval yeast heirlooms being passed down from one generation of monks to the next, like secret family treasures. By evening, the mash is fully prepared and resting in the wooden vessels. You feel a deep sense of accomplishment and calm, aware that patience, attention, and care have created the foundation for what will eventually become a drink that sustains, nourishes, and comforts. The monks begin their evening prayers, the chapel's bell echoing softly through the cloisters. You follow their rhythm, carrying with you the quiet satisfaction of a day spent in slow, mindful labor. And as you stand there, breathing in the warm, malty air, you realize that this entire process, grain, water, yeast, herbs, is a meditation in motion.
Each bubble, each stir, each careful pour is a whisper of devotion, a gentle reminder that patience is the true art of brewing, and perhaps of life itself.
The morning begins with a gentle hush. Light creeps across the cloistered walls, casting soft, elongated shadows over the stone floor. You walk barefoot, feeling the coolness beneath your toes, carrying a sense of both anticipation and comfort. Today is about the subtle, almost magical process of monitoring fermentation, a stage that demands patience, observation, and a quiet reverence for the invisible life at work in the vats. The monks call it listening to the beer, which to your slightly skeptical modern mind sounds both absurd and oddly poetic. You follow Brother Gerald into the brewery, the familiar scent of malt and yeast and steam enveloping you like a gentle cloak. The vats stand in orderly rows, each lid slightly steamed, each surface gently vibrating with the quiet activity of thousands of tiny, unseen organisms. You lean close, noticing the soft hiss of gas escaping, bubbles forming and popping on the surface. There is rhythm here, a slow, measured pulse that seems almost alive. The first lesson of the day is subtle observation. Brother Gerald shows you how to watch the foam, noting its thickness, color, and movement. It tells a story, he murmurs. You stare, trying to see what he sees. The foam rises higher in one vat than another, shifting from creamy beige to a pale honey color. He points out the slight tremor of bubbles in the corner, a sure sign that the yeast is awake and working diligently. You nod, though you wonder if your concentration is more about avoiding spilling the precious liquid than interpreting microbial behavior. Historians still argue whether monks fully understood the microbiology behind fermentation or whether their careful observation was guided by centuries of trial and error. Either way, their attention to detail ensured remarkably consistent beer. You feel a quiet awe at this blend of intuition, patience, and the practical knowledge that allowed these brews to sustain bodies and communities alike. A quirky tidbit emerges as you observe. Some monasteries believe that speaking softly to the vats encouraged the yeast to perform better. Brother Gerald whispers a few lines of chant to the foam, and you watch the bubbles dance as if responding to his words. You try it yourself, murmuring a tentative "good morning" to the nearest vat. Nothing visibly changes, but the act itself feels oddly calming, as if your voice, however ineffective in microbial communication, is contributing to the ritual of care. The vats are not left entirely to chance, though. You help check the temperature with a wooden stick, noting the subtle warmth radiating through the liquid. Too cold, and the yeast would slow. Too hot, and it would die. Each measurement is recorded meticulously on parchment, the monk's careful handwriting forming neat, flowing lines. You begin to appreciate how every tiny adjustment is a balance between art, craft, and survival. As you stir a small portion of the mash, the scent of malt and yeast becomes more pronounced, warming your senses and drawing your thoughts inward. The process is hypnotic. You start to imagine the tiny yeast cells as tireless little monks themselves, working faithfully in the dark, unseen corners of the world. Perhaps they too feel a sense of purpose in transforming grain into sustenance. Historians still debate whether this attention to microbial life was accidental or intentional. Some manuscripts suggest monks had no concept of bacteria, but noticed consistent results when they observed fermentation carefully.
Others propose that repeated generations of brewers pass down empirical knowledge like a sacred secret. Regardless, the meticulous monitoring served both spiritual and practical ends. By mid-morning, the vats have shifted noticeably. Foam thickens at the edges, a slight caramel hue appearing as sugars begin to convert. Brother Gerald shows you how to gently skim off excess foam to prevent overflow, a task requiring both delicacy and timing. You mimic his movements, careful not to disturb the yeast's work too aggressively. The foam resists slightly, glistening and soft, almost like whipped cream suspended in amber light. The act of watching, adjusting, and skimming becomes meditative. Your body relaxes as you synchronize with the subtle rhythm of the brewing room, the hiss of fermentation, the soft creak of wood under the vat's weight, the occasional distant chant from the chapel. There's a hypnotic cadence to all of it, a combination of work, observation, and quiet reflection that calms the mind even as it engages the senses. A small interruption, a novice trips over a loose cobblestone and spills a bit of wort. Brother Gerald chuckles softly, reassuring the boy with a calm, patient smile. Even in the perfect order, the world hums with chaos, he says, as if the spilled liquid itself were a gentle reminder of imperfection. You laugh quietly, appreciating the blend of humor and humanity in this sacred craft. The day continues in measured steps. You rotate barrels slightly to ensure even fermentation, noting subtle differences in aroma, texture, and color. Some vats smell more earthy. Others carry a slightly sweet, honeyed note. It is a sensory symphony, engaging sight, smell, touch, and even imagination. You feel suspended in time, caught between the patient rhythm of the monastery and the unseen miracles occurring within the barrels. A quirky tidbit, in some abbeys, monks would leave a small portion of fermenting wort for the birds or the occasional wandering cat, believing that sharing a bit of the brew kept both humans and creatures in harmony. You smile at the image of a tiny tabby carefully lapping at ale while the monks look on with solemn approval. As afternoon approaches, the vats shift into a quieter phase. The foam slows its movement, the hiss of escaping gas softens, and the aroma mellows into a comforting blend of malt, yeast, and faint herbal notes. You step back, noticing the visual symmetry of the barrels, the gentle light filtering through windows, and the soft echo of chants from the chapel. The brewery feels alive yet peaceful, dynamic yet calm, a living meditation in wood, grain, and patience. Historians still argue whether the monks' rituals around fermentation were driven more by superstition or scientific observation. Perhaps it was impossible to separate the two. In a world where the unseen governed both spirit and health, every act of care, every whispered chant, every careful adjustment was simultaneously practical and sacred. As the sun dips toward the horizon, the monks begin to prepare the room for evening. The final checks are made, foam skimmed, temperatures noted, barrels gently rotated. You feel a deep sense of calm, awareness of the centuries of tradition, and a quiet reverence for the invisible life that has labored alongside you. Fermentation is not complete, not yet, but you sense its progress, steady and patient, like the slow turning of time itself. You leave the brewery for a moment, stepping into the courtyard. The air is cool, filled with the scent of wet stone and distant herbs. The bells toll for vespers, and the monks begin to gather in the chapel, their voices rising and falling in gentle cadence. You pause, listening to the harmony,
realizing that the rhythm of prayer and brewing are intertwined, both acts of patience, observation, and quiet devotion. You carry with you the lesson of today that even the smallest, most invisible life, yeast rising, bubbles forming, liquid transforming, can teach the value of attentiveness, patience, and care. That the act of watching, gently guiding, and nurturing can be as sacred as any prayer, and that perhaps the rhythm of fermentation is a meditation that carries the soul as surely as it nourishes the body.
Morning arrives slowly, spilling a gentle, diffused light across the monastery walls. You trudge along the familiar stone paths, your footsteps echoing softly in the still air. Today's lesson is an unusual one. You will accompany the monks as they prepare the barrels for aging, a process that transforms the young, bubbly brew into a mellow, stable beer fit for drinking or sharing. There's a quiet anticipation in the air, the kind that seems to pulse alongside the very walls of the cloister, and you feel a subtle thrill at being part of this centuries-old practice. Brother Lambert greets you with a nod, carrying a small mallet and a long, polished wooden spile. Today, he says with his usual understated humor, you will learn how to persuade a barrel to keep secrets. You follow him to the storage room, where rows upon rows of wooden barrels lie stacked in neat, fragrant rows. The smell of oak mingles with lingering malt, a heady, grounding aroma that settles in your chest like a soft sigh. Each barrel tells its own story. Some are marked for local consumption, some for travelers, and a few for preservation, to be shared only on special occasions. You notice subtle differences in the wood. Some barrels dark and aged, their staves slightly warped with age. Others pale and smooth, freshly constructed from forest oak. Each one has its character, its personality, and you are learning, slowly, to read it. Historians still debate how much medieval monks understood the chemistry of aging beer. Some suggest they relied purely on tradition, passed down from master to novice, while others argue that centuries of observation gave them practical knowledge that rivaled early scientific understanding. Whatever the truth, it is clear that the barrels themselves are instruments of both preservation and subtle transformation. Brother Lambert demonstrates how to test a barrel for readiness. He taps it gently with the mallet, listening for a deep, resonant note that suggests the wood is solid and watertight. A good barrel will speak to you, he says quietly, though only if you listen carefully. You tap your own first barrel, and the sound is slightly higher pitched, a little uncertain. Lambert chuckles softly. It will learn, he says, patting the wood, like all apprentices. Preparing the barrels for aging involves more than just inspection. The monks fill them partially with boiling water, letting the steam expand the wood and seal the staves. The smell of heated oak mingles with the malt and yeast, creating a sensory experience that is both grounding and intoxicatingly domestic. You lift a heavy ladle and pour water into the barrel, marveling at the steam rising like gentle clouds. It is hot, comforting, and strangely meditative. Quirky tidbit: some monasteries occasionally added a pinch of herbs or even old ale to new barrels during the preparation stage. This was thought to encourage the spirit of the wood to accept the new brew, a form of sympathetic magic rooted in centuries of careful observation. You smile, imagining tiny, invisible conversations between yeast, oak, and ancient monkly wisdom. Perhaps there's more truth to it than modern science would credit. Once the barrels are prepared, the young beer is carefully ladled in. You watch as the frothy liquid fills each cask, the soft hiss of bubbles rising through the wood like whispered confessions. The monks handle the transfer with patience and ceremony, pouring slowly, stirring gently, and checking temperature along the way. Even a novice like yourself is encouraged to move deliberately. Haste is considered a kind of sacrilege. A mainstream fact: barrel aging has a chemical impact on beer, subtly altering flavors through oxidation and interaction with the wood's natural compounds. Even without understanding the science, medieval monks discovered that patience in barrels improved taste, consistency, and shelf life. You find it humbling to think that generations of trial, error, and observation yielded practical wisdom that modern brewers now explain with chemistry. As the barrels fill, you notice the monks occasionally whisper to them or bless the liquid. There is humor in it, soft, understated, almost shy, but also a quiet reverence. The ale is alive in a way that feels tangible, and the rituals surrounding it seem to honor that life. You begin to understand why humor and devotion coexist in these halls. They soften labor while maintaining respect for its mysteries. The barrels are then sealed with thick wooden lids, pressed tightly and secured with hoops of iron. The wood creaks under pressure, and the ale inside sighs softly, settling into its new home. You run your hand along the smooth staves, feeling the heat radiate faintly. Every barrel is a miniature universe, holding fermentation, flavor, and the patience of countless monks. Historians still argue how medieval monks decided how long beer should age. Some argue they followed strict tradition, while others suggest they simply observed and tasted, learning from years of experience. Either way, the process reflects careful attention to both craft and intuition. You find yourself leaning into that rhythm, noticing the subtle changes in aroma and color as each barrel breathes and absorbs the world around it. You help roll a few barrels into the cooler, dimly lit cellar. The air smells rich with malt, wood, and damp stone, a comforting blend that seems almost sacred. Here, in the quiet shadows, the ale will rest for days or weeks, settling into flavors that only patience can coax forth. The monks move with a slow precision, stacking barrels and checking seals with care, their footsteps soft on the stone floor. A humorous aside: once, according to local lore, a novice accidentally sealed a barrel upside down, creating a minor flood in the cellar. The monks reportedly laughed quietly for an hour before correcting the mistake, calling it the day the ale tried to escape. You imagine the clinking of wooden hoops and the soft, fizzing rebellion of young beer, and can't help but smile. The day winds down, and the monks begin their evening prayers. You sit quietly among the barrels, inhaling the comforting scent of oak, malt, and yeast. The soft light from high windows glances off the curved staves, and you realize how much patience, observation, and quiet ritual are embedded in every step of the brewing process. Each barrel contains more than beer. It contains discipline, faith, and centuries of learned care. As you leave the cellar, the cool evening air brushing your face, you feel a soft satisfaction, a kind of reverent calm. The barrels will rest and transform in silence, just as the monks themselves transform through daily devotion. The rhythm of their labor, their laughter, their careful attention all echoes in the hushed stone halls. And as night falls, you think about the quiet miracles happening in each barrel, the yeast at work, the liquid settling, and the slow, patient transformation that mirrors life itself. Here, in the heart of the monastery, beer is more than drink. It is a testament to patience, humility, and the gentle, unnoticed magic of daily care.
The morning begins softly, sunlight spilling across the courtyard in gentle streaks, glinting on dew-laden stone and the spines of low wooden barrels. You trudge along the familiar path toward the brewery, the crisp air brushing against your cheeks, carrying the faint, comforting scent of malt and earth. Today's work is subtler, quieter, aging the ale, observing the slow, almost imperceptible transformations that turn raw fermentation into a drink that is smooth, flavorful, and surprisingly nuanced. Brother Conrad greets you at the threshold of the brewing hall, his hands tucked into the folds of his robe, his expression serene. "Today," he murmurs, "we watch the passage of time." You follow him into the room where the barrels rest in neat rows, each one a vessel of patience, hums with the quiet life of the yeast inside. The air is thick with warmth, faintly sweet and earthy, the aroma deepening as the day progresses. A mainstream historical fact sets the stage. Medieval monks often aged their ales for weeks, even months, depending on the intended strength and flavor. The practice was not only practical, allowing time for fermentation to complete and flavors to meld, but also an exercise in patience and observation, aligning with the monastic rhythm of daily prayer, labor, and reflection. You realize that the passage of time itself is a kind of ritual here, each day marking subtle changes in aroma, texture, and taste. You kneel beside a large oak barrel and run your fingers over its rough surface, feeling the grain of the wood that has held countless brews over decades. Inside, the ale is a rich amber, the bubbles having slowed to a languid rise like tiny golden lanterns floating in slow motion. The yeast has performed its invisible alchemy, transforming simple sugars into alcohol, carbon dioxide, and subtle esters that lend complexity to the drink. You watch, fascinated, as the liquid settles, learning to read the tiny visual cues that indicate readiness or the need for further patience. Historians still argue whether medieval monks understood the chemistry behind aging or whether their knowledge was purely empirical, built from careful observation over generations. You suspect it was both. Quirky tidbit. Some abbeys reportedly whispered to their barrels during the aging process, believing that kind words, blessings, or gentle prayers could influence the yeast and improve the final flavor. While science today might call this superstition, the act itself created a meditative interaction between human and brew, a rhythm of attention that quietly nurtured both. You imagine standing here, murmuring encouragement to the ale, the soft hissing of fermentation punctuating your words like a gentle, invisible applause. You move from barrel to barrel, observing subtle differences. One ale carries a slightly floral aroma, another a hint of earthiness, a third warmer, almost nutty. The monks' careful selection of herbs, their timing in adding flavorings, and the positioning of barrels in the hall all contribute to these variations. It is a sensory puzzle, a dance of light, heat, and quiet chemical magic. You begin to understand why brewing was considered both an art and a science,
centuries before chemistry was formalized. The quiet rhythm of aging allows your thoughts to wander. You notice how even small actions, the tilt of a barrel, the sound of a gentle tap, the brush of a hand over the oak, are significant. Patience becomes palpable, a tactile and olfactory experience, guiding every movement. The monks move slowly, their eyes attentive, occasionally nodding to each other in silent communication. Every gesture is measured, deliberate, and in harmony with the flow of time within the room. Mainstream historical insight. Some abbeys in Europe kept detailed records of brewing schedules, noting temperatures, ingredient proportions, and even weather patterns. These meticulous logs helped ensure consistency across batches, a practice that laid the groundwork for modern brewing science. You reflect on the precision involved and the quiet discipline required, appreciating how centuries-old rituals still influence contemporary brewing. The afternoon sunlight slants through the high windows, illuminating fine particles in the air that dance like tiny motes of gold. You kneel to examine a particularly rich barrel, dipping a small spoon into the liquid. The aroma is complex: sweet malt, gentle bitterness, faint herbal notes. You taste carefully, the flavors subtle but layered. Even without modern equipment, the monks' senses were finely tuned, capable of discerning differences invisible to most. You marvel at the way observation and practice have evolved into expertise. A humorous note punctuates the solemnity. Brother Conrad mutters quietly to a novice struggling to lift a barrel. "Remember, the ale has patience. You do too, or you'll spill it on your habit." You laugh softly, appreciating the understated humor, a gentle reminder that even in strict routine, human warmth persists. The novices grin sheepishly, learning the balance between diligence and levity. As the day unfolds, you notice how the ambient conditions, the cool stone, distant shadows, and the faint hum of other brewing tasks play a role in the ale's maturation. Even small differences in temperature, airflow, or light exposure affect the subtle chemistry. The monks, through generations of observation and trial, have learned to work with these factors rather than against them, creating conditions conducive to gentle, predictable transformation. Quirky tidbit: in some monasteries, barrels were rotated periodically, not just to mix the brew, but to ensure that the yeast settled evenly and that flavors developed consistently. The practice became a form of mindfulness, a quiet attention to process and detail that mirrored the contemplative life of the monks themselves. You imagine standing here, performing these rotations, feeling the weight of the barrel and the slow, meditative sway as it moves, a tactile extension of patience. By late afternoon, the barrels are settled in their assigned places, the ale resting quietly. You take a step back, inhaling the rich aroma, noticing the warm golden light reflecting off the wooden surfaces. There is a profound calm in the room, a sense that time itself is part of the craft. The ale, now aging slowly, embodies centuries of accumulated knowledge, attention, and quiet devotion. Historians still argue whether the practice of aging beer was primarily practical, spiritual, or a blend of both. Standing here, observing the monks' care, you suspect it's inseparable. The act of waiting, observing, and tending is itself a ritual, a gentle rhythm that sustains both liquid and human spirit. As the sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the brewery floor, you realize that the day has taught more than just brewing techniques. You've absorbed the quiet language of observation, the meditative cadence of patience, and the gentle art of aligning human effort with natural processes. The ale rests now, almost imperceptibly changing, just as you will rest later, shaped, subtly, by the rhythm of time and attention. And in that moment, as the warmth of the day softens into evening and the quiet hissing of yeast punctuates the stillness, you understand that aging is not merely a stage of brewing, it is a meditation, a dialogue between craft, patience, and subtle magic. Each barrel tells a story, each bubble whispers a lesson, and you, standing quietly among them, become part of a continuum that stretches back centuries, a gentle witness to the alchemy of time.
The sun rises slowly over the monastery, spilling a soft golden light across the stone walls and cobbled courtyard. You trudge along the familiar path toward the brewery, the cool morning air carrying faint scents of malt, herbs, and damp straw. Today, the task shifts from tasting and evaluation to preservation, bottling, and storing. The silent, patient labor that ensures the beer you've brewed will endure, mellow, and mature over time. You feel a quiet thrill, understanding that the work you perform today is less about immediate results and more about setting the stage for months of gentle transformation. Brother Gervais greets you with a nod, his eyes sparkling with the subtle pride of someone who has performed this ritual countless times. He leads you to a line of wooden barrels, each resting on carefully angled racks designed to encourage sedimentation and clarity. The secret, he murmurs, is in patience and gentle hands. Let the beer rest, and it will reward you. You kneel beside a barrel, inhaling the earthy, malty aroma, feeling the warmth radiating through the wood. The bubbles at the surface are fewer now, slower, like tiny golden orbs taking their last breath of activity before quieting into stillness. You begin by carefully testing the ale's clarity, using a small ladle to draw a sample. The liquid glimmers amber and gold, catching the morning sunlight. You hold it up to your eye, observing the subtle shimmer and tiny suspended particles. This step is delicate. Too rough a pour, and sediment will mix back in, disrupting the gentle stratification that has taken weeks to achieve. Historians still debate whether medieval monks fully understood the science behind sedimentation, or if their methods were developed entirely through careful observation and trial. Either way, the results are consistent and remarkable, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of processes only centuries later explained by microbiology. A quirky tidbit emerges as you work. Some abbeys believed that talking softly to the ale during bottling encouraged clarity, almost as if the yeast responded to gentle words of reassurance. You smile at the thought of centuries of hushed whispers, prayers, and quiet encouragement directed at invisible microbes. Perhaps it worked. Perhaps it simply helped the monks maintain a patient, attentive rhythm, which was equally important. With a ladle, you carefully transfer ale from the barrel into clay or wooden bottles, the liquid moving slowly, deliberately, to avoid disturbing the sediment at the bottom. The work is tactile and soothing, each motion measured, rhythmic, and almost meditative. You feel the smooth curve of the bottle against your hand, the weight of the liquid shifting gently as it fills the container. The soft glug of ale settling into the vessels becomes a quiet soundtrack, a gentle percussion accompanying the slow, methodical work of preservation. Mainstream historical fact. By the 14th century, many European monasteries had developed rudimentary bottling systems,
often using clay or wooden vessels sealed with wax or cloth. This allowed beer to be stored for months, even shipped to neighboring abbeys or towns. Preservation was as much about sustaining the monastery through lean seasons as it was about maintaining a steady supply of a staple beverage for pilgrims and locals. You notice the meticulous care the monks take in labeling each bottle, not just with the date, but sometimes with the intended recipient: hospital, guest house, traveling pilgrim, or the type of brew: dark, pale, spiced, herbal. Some barrels even bear the names of individual batches, personalizing the ale in a way that makes each container feel alive, like a quiet bottled story of labor and devotion. You begin to understand that even in its stillness, the beer carries life, the energy of yeast, the aroma of herbs, and the intention of the hands that nurtured it. You can almost imagine the bubbles inside each bottle settling as if in silent meditation, responding to the same patience that governs the monastery's daily life. Historians still debate whether medieval bottling was intended primarily for hygiene or ritual. Certainly sealing the beer prevented spoilage, but in many abbeys the act of bottling itself was accompanied by quiet blessing, sometimes even soft chanting. You watch Brother Gervais dip a small piece of cloth in wine and touch it gently to the wax seal on a bottle. "May it nourish the body and calm the spirit," he whispers. The words feel natural, a soft cadence that blends seamlessly with the gentle labor. You carry the first filled bottle to the storage room, a dim, cool space with stone shelves and soft shadows. The air is slightly musty, but tempered with the lingering aroma of malt and herbs. You carefully place the vessel in its designated spot, noting how each bottle fits into a larger plan, a grid of patience and foresight. Some bottles are stacked for short-term consumption, others for months of aging. Each one is a quiet experiment in time, observation, and patience. A quirky tidbit emerges. Some monasteries had storage rooms with small windows designed to let in just enough light to prevent mold without warming the beer excessively. Others hung bundles of herbs in the rafters, claiming that their subtle fragrance improved the ale's flavor as it aged. You chuckle softly, imagining centuries of ale resting amidst dried flowers and moss, fermenting gently under watchful, loving care. The day drifts onward, measured by the soft toll of distant bells. You continue filling, sealing, and arranging bottles, each action deliberate, each step contributing to the long, patient process of maturing the beer. You feel a quiet pride in your work, a sense that you are participating in something larger than yourself, something sustained by careful attention, subtle artistry, and centuries of accumulated knowledge. As evening approaches, the final bottles are sealed and stored. You step back, taking in the rows of amber liquid, each container reflecting sunlight in soft, muted glimmers. The monks begin their evening prayers, moving with quiet grace through the cloisters. You follow, carrying with you a lingering warmth from the labor and the subtle aromas of malt, herbs, and yeast. You realize as you walk that bottling is more than preservation. It is trust. Trust in the yeast, trust in the ingredients, trust in the passage of time, and trust in the rhythm of careful, unhurried work. Each bottle is a tiny testament to patience, skill, and devotion, a quiet miracle awaiting the moment when its flavors
are fully realized. Even as you join the monks for evening prayers, your mind lingers on the bottles. Amber vessels filled with liquid patience, quietly fermenting, quietly maturing, quietly alive. And in this gentle, reflective rhythm, you understand a profound lesson. Craft, care, and attention, when combined with patience, create something enduring, nourishing, and quietly extraordinary.
The following morning arrives wrapped in fog, the kind that makes the world feel suspended. Sound softened, air cool, and every step a little slower than usual. You move quietly through the cloister, past the herb garden glistening with dew, toward the monastery's small dining hall. Today the monks will serve the latest batch of ale for the first time. A ceremonial tasting, not for critique, but for gratitude. This is where brewing meets community, where the quiet labor of many hands becomes nourishment for all. Inside, long wooden tables stretch beneath low, arching beams, polished by decades of elbows and candle wax. The air smells faintly of bread, cheese, and the sweet undertone of malt. At the far end of the room, Brother Anselm stands beside two large jugs of ale, their oak surfaces darkened with condensation. You take a seat among the brothers, the shuffling of robes and murmurs of blessing echoing gently around you. As you wait, you feel a subtle tension of anticipation. The monks are patient people, but even they have their moments of quiet excitement. The ale has rested for weeks, aging gently in the cool cellar, and now it's ready to meet its purpose. When Brother Anselm finally pours, the sound is satisfying. A slow glug-glug, followed by the faint hiss of escaping bubbles. The scent is instantly familiar. Grain, herbs, and that earthy yeastiness that only time can soften. You take your first sip, and the flavor has transformed. What was once raw and green now feels rounded, smooth, mellow. There's a warmth at the back of your throat, not just from alcohol, but from the memory of the work, the long hours stirring, boiling, waiting. You close your eyes and taste the labor, the laughter, the quiet prayer. Mainstream historical fact: monastic beer was not brewed for indulgence, but sustenance. In the fasting seasons, when solid food was restricted, ale became a crucial part of the monk's diet, providing calories and nutrition. Rich in carbohydrates and B vitamins, this liquid bread sustained entire communities through the lean months. You glance around and notice how every monk drinks slowly, in silence, savoring each sip. It's not a toast, not a feast, but a meditation. The act of drinking is deliberate, an extension of prayer, a way of acknowledging the care that transformed water and grain into something nourishing. It's as if every swallow says thank you to God, to the earth, to the yeast that worked unseen. A quirky tidbit bubbles up in your memory. In some monasteries, the monks had a hierarchy of ale. The best, strongest brew, called prima melior, was reserved for the abbot and honored guests. The weaker, everyday beer, servitia monachorum, was for the brothers, while an even lighter version, called small beer, was given to travelers, peasants, and even children. You imagine the abbey bustling on feast days, barrels rolled out for pilgrims, laughter rising above the chants, and the smell of fresh bread mingling with malt. Historians still argue whether monks considered beer-making a sacred act or simply a necessary craft. But looking around this hall, seeing tired faces soften with the first sip of the day, you can't help but feel it's both, a service to others and a quiet devotion to the art of patience. Brother Matthew, who's usually solemn, leans toward you and whispers with a small smile, "This batch might even make fasting enjoyable." You chuckle softly, careful not to disturb the tranquil atmosphere. Humor, even whispered, feels like a small blessing in this world of reverence. As the meal continues, the ale works its subtle magic. Not intoxication, but relaxation. Conversation flows more freely, laughter rises, and the long hours of labor feel distant, softened by fellowship. You realize how crucial these moments are. The community doesn't just share prayer or work, but nourishment. Every act of brewing, tasting, and drinking weaves the monks closer together, creating a tapestry of routine that holds them through the passing years. You take another sip, tracing the memory of its ingredients: the malted barley from the monastery fields, the herbs from the garden, the water drawn from the ancient well. Each stage has left its imprint, like layers of prayer pressed into liquid form. There's a certain poetry in how something so ordinary, grain and water, becomes a reflection of discipline, patience, and care. You think of how yeast, invisible to the eye, transforms the mixture from lifeless mash to living drink. Perhaps faith works much the same way, unseen but steadily active, changing what seems simple into something sustaining. Another historical truth emerges from your reverie. Many monasteries became renowned for their beer, creating local economies around them. Pilgrims traveling long distances would stop specifically to sample the monks' brews, often bringing back jugs as tokens of blessing or good fortune. Some abbeys even used the profits from selling beer to fund hospitals, libraries, and relief for the poor. Brewing, it turns out, wasn't just a comfort within walls, it was an act of generosity that rippled outward. Brother Anselm refills your cup, the golden liquid glimmering in the candlelight. He nods approvingly. "It's balanced," he says. "Strong enough for spirit, soft enough for peace." You nod back, appreciating how neatly that sums up the experience. A faint warmth hums in your chest, not the rush of intoxication, but the gentler glow of satisfaction. Around you, the monks continue eating, chatting softly about the harvests, the state of the barley, and whether the next batch might use fewer herbs. It's a meeting of minds disguised as a meal, a conference conducted in whispers and smiles, its agenda written in foam and flavor. Outside, the bells toll the end of the meal, a gentle reminder that every pleasure here is balanced by structure. You rise with the others, bow your head for grace, and carry your cup back to the kitchen where novices are already washing utensils. The smell of yeast and roasted grain lingers on your hands. As you step outside into the courtyard, the fog has lifted, revealing a pale silver-blue sky. You breathe deeply, the crisp air blending with the faint sweetness of ale still on your tongue. You feel both grounded and uplifted, anchored in the quiet rhythm of monastic life. Every act, you realize, is a form of brewing. Thoughts ferment into reflection, prayers distill into peace, and the soul, given time and care, matures into something fuller, warmer, more generous. Historians still debate whether monks were aware of how advanced their brewing science truly was, or if it was simply intuition honed by centuries of practice. But in this quiet courtyard, it doesn't matter. The results, clear, nourishing, and shared, speak for themselves. You linger for a while, listening to the faint hum of bees near the herb garden, the soft splash of water in the fountain, and the distant echo of a chant beginning in the chapel. You feel the steady pulse of this place, its patience, its care, its quiet joy in turning labor into nourishment. And as the day warms, you find yourself smiling, not from the ale, but from the realization that everything here, from brewing to prayer, shares one purpose: to create balance, both within and beyond. The monks may call it devotion, the brewers may call it craft, but you, sitting here under the morning sun, call it peace.
The next morning is quiet. So quiet that even the crows perched on the bell tower seem reluctant to break the calm. You trudge down the stone steps, the air carrying a soft chill and the faint scent of malt drifting from the brewhouse. Today is Bottling and Blessing Day, a rare moment when the sacred and the practical converge. The beer has finished fermenting and aging. It's time to seal it, to preserve not just the drink itself but the care, patience, and quiet rhythm that went into its making. Brother Otto, the cellar master, waits for you near the rows of resting barrels. His robe is already dusted with flour and barley powder, his face set in the familiar blend of focus and serenity. This, he says with a smile, is the final stage of humility, knowing when to let go. You nod, understanding what he means. Brewing is an act of guidance, but the ale itself, once sealed, belongs to time and faith. You begin by rolling the barrels gently toward the bottling bench. The process is slow, steady, deliberate. A monk taps the spigot with careful precision, allowing the golden liquid to flow into a row of earthenware jugs. The air fills with the comforting scent of malt, yeast, and faint herbs, a smell that now feels like a friend. The rhythm of the work is hypnotic. Pour, pause, cork, seal, bless. Over and over, the simple sequence feels like prayer. You find your mind drifting, not in distraction, but in quiet alignment with the steady flow of liquid and labor. A mainstream historical fact floats into your thoughts. Medieval monasteries were among the first to develop standardized bottling techniques, ensuring their beer could be transported safely to pilgrims, travelers, and even nearby villages. Their innovations in sealing, corking, and labeling helped spread brewing knowledge far beyond the monastery walls. As you help another monk pour ale into jugs, you notice small variations in the bottle's shapes, some squat and rounded, others tall and narrow. Brother Otto explains that each shape serves a purpose – larger bottles for feasts, smaller ones for daily sustenance. You imagine monks across Europe debating bottle shapes with the same quiet seriousness that modern engineers might debate aerodynamics. Historians still argue whether these variations were practical or symbolic, whether form followed function or perhaps faith. Then comes the quirky detail, whispered by Brother Otto with a smile. Some abbeys used to seal their bottles with a prayer written on the cork. They said the words kept the ale from souring. You picture it, tiny scraps of parchment, inked blessings tucked inside wax-sealed bottles. It's a small, charming superstition that feels almost logical in this world where faith and fermentation live side by side. The sound of corks popping and sealing wax dripping fills the room in a gentle symphony. You could almost feel the centuries humming beneath the rhythm, every movement echoing through time. There's something soothing about it. No haste, no urgency, just deliberate care. The monks hum softly as they work, their low voices weaving through the air like threads in a tapestry. One monk, Brother Tomas, cracks a quiet joke as he steadies a jug. "If we bottled patience itself, I think it would taste like this." The line makes the others smile, and for a brief moment, the solemn work feels light as laughter ripples through the brewhouse. You find yourself grinning too, knowing that humor, gentle, warm, never mocking, is part of what keeps these men balanced between duty and joy. You take a turn sealing the jugs with wax. The material melts slowly in a small copper pot over a candle flame, the wax's scent faintly sweet and woody. You dip the corked tops into it one by one, letting the liquid coating harden to a deep crimson sheen. The wax catches the light, glimmering like rubies in the dim room. Each finished bottle looks almost sacred, as though it contains more than ale, something of time itself condensed into a tangible form. Historians still debate whether monks viewed brewing primarily as economic sustenance or spiritual exercise. What's clear, as you stand there sealing bottle after bottle, is that it was both, a harmony between earthly need and divine rhythm.
Every drop of ale, every grain of barley was treated as a gift to be respected and tended, not merely consumed. You pause for a drink of water, noticing the difference between it and the ale. One clear and pure, the other rich and alive. You think about how the monks once brewed primarily for safety, because clean drinking water was not always guaranteed. But over time their beer became something more. It nourished the body, lifted the spirit, and united the community in quiet celebration. Brother Otto gathers the monks for the blessing. They form a loose circle around the finished jugs, their heads bowed, hands folded. The air hums faintly with murmured Latin prayers. You close your eyes and listen, the sound soothing, rhythmic almost like the bubbling of fermenting ale itself. As the chant rises and falls, you feel a deep calm settle over you. The blessing isn't about sanctifying a drink. It's about honoring the work, the patience, the care that went into it. It's about acknowledging the invisible hands of nature and time that finished what human effort began. Quirky tidbit. In some monasteries, the blessing was followed by a testing sip. A monk chosen at random would take a small drink to ensure the ale was pure. If it wasn't, the others would jokingly claim he needed stronger faith in the next batch. You could almost hear the laughter that would follow, echoing softly through these same stone halls centuries ago. When the blessing ends, the room returns to its usual quiet hum. The bottles are stacked carefully on wooden racks, each one labeled with the batch number and the date. You help carry a few to the storage cellar, where the air is cool and damp, perfect for preservation. The flickering light of torches plays across rows of bottles, casting long, warm shadows. As you walk through the dimness, the rhythm of your footsteps syncs with the drip of condensation and the distant murmur of chanting from the chapel. It feels timeless, this balance between labor and stillness, between making and waiting. Brother Otto pats your shoulder. "You've learned something most don't," he says quietly. That patience doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing something slowly, with care. You nod, feeling the truth of it settle inside you. The day ends with the soft clang of bells signaling the evening meal. You and the other monks gather in the refectory where bread, cheese, and a small portion of the newly bottled ale are shared. The beer tastes full and alive, a quiet celebration of time, care, and collaboration. You sip slowly, feeling warmth spread through your chest, and realize that you are drinking not just a beverage, but a story centuries deep. As night falls, you step outside beneath the dark sky. The air smells faintly of malt and cool stone. The stars shimmer above the monastery roofs, their lights scattered like barley grains on velvet. You breathe deeply, feeling content, at peace, and faintly amused that something as simple as beer could contain so much patience, faith, and quiet joy. In the distance, a monk hums a low tune, perhaps one that has accompanied this ritual for generations. You smile, knowing the cycle will continue. Brewing, bottling, blessing, over and over, as constant as the rising sun. And somewhere deep inside, you sense the enduring lesson of the monastery's tale, that even in a world of silence and stillness, creation continues, quietly, patiently, and beautifully alive.
The morning sky unfolds in pale hues of blue and gold, a thin fog hugging the monastery walls like a cloak. You trudge along the cobblestone path, the faint scent of malt and smoke rising from the brewery ahead. Today's task feels different, less about brewing, more about community. You are to join the monks as they distribute the finished ale to travelers, workers, and guests who find their way to the abbey gates. The air carries a sense of gentle purpose, a reminder that brewing here is not an isolated craft, but a gift meant to be shared. Brother Thomas, his robe slightly stained from years of work, greets you with a nod and a kind smile. "Today," he says softly, You learn the purpose of our labor. He leads you toward a long wooden table where several small casks sit neatly arranged, their surfaces smooth and gleaming from beeswax polish. Some are bound for the infirmary, others for the refectory, and a few for passing travelers seeking warmth and comfort. You can hear faint chatter outside the gate, a mix of pilgrims, peasants, and tradesmen waiting patiently for the day's offering. You help load the smaller casks onto a wooden cart. The air is cool, carrying the faint sweetness of the ale through the open courtyard. As you roll the cart toward the gate, the rhythmic squeak of wooden wheels becomes almost hypnotic. You realize that this moment, this act of giving, completes the brewing cycle. From field to fermentation to barrel to cup, every stage has led to this quiet generosity. A mainstream historical fact: many monasteries in medieval Europe produced ale not only for their own consumption, but also for charity. It was considered an act of piety to provide safe, nourishing drink to travelers and the poor. Since water was often unsafe, beer became both sustenance and hospitality, a gesture of faith in liquid form. Outside the gate, the small crowd greets the monks with quiet gratitude. Some bow, others smile, and a few simply hold out their cups with reverent hands. The ale you helped brew is ladled out gently, golden and clear, its foam catching the morning light. You watch as each person takes a sip, the warmth spreading across their faces. It's a simple exchange, yet deeply moving, a reminder that craft and compassion are intertwined. A quirky detail: certain abbeys used to designate one monk as the cup keeper, responsible for ensuring that no visitor ever left thirsty. The position was considered both practical and spiritual, a symbol of service, humility, and joy. You can imagine the cup keeper bustling around with a quiet smile, cup in one hand, ladle in the other, ensuring comfort in a world often marked by hardship. Brother Thomas ladles a portion into your own cup and raises his in silent toast. "To labor and rest," he says. You take a sip, savoring the familiar warmth and mild sweetness. The flavor is deeper now, infused not just with malt and herbs, but with the satisfaction of shared effort. Historians still argue whether this charitable brewing tradition had economic motives or purely devotional ones, but standing here, you sense sincerity in every drop. As the morning wears on, you assist the monks in refilling cups and steadying barrels. Each interaction carries quiet grace: a mother offering thanks for her child's drink, a tired traveler whispering a prayer, an elderly man smiling faintly as he savors the ale. The rhythm of pouring and receiving feels almost liturgical, a ceremony of gratitude and gentleness. You notice that the monks never rush. Each pour is deliberate, each exchange accompanied by a few calm words. "Peace be upon you," murmurs one monk as he fills a wooden cup. The words blend with the soft slosh of liquid, forming a tranquil melody. The people linger, sharing stories, laughter, and weary smiles. The scene is simple, human, and profoundly peaceful. Humor, as always, finds its way gently. Brother Thomas leans over and whispers, "They drink our ale faster than we pray. It's a miracle of its own." You laughed softly, nearly spilling your cup. The lightheartedness never breaks the serenity. It simply rounds the moment, making the charity feel even warmer. A mainstream historical detail: monastic ale was often of varying strengths, stronger for the monks themselves, and weaker, lighter versions, called small beer, for guests, workers, and children. These weaker ales contained enough alcohol to purify, but little enough to nourish safely, making them an everyday drink across Europe. You realize that the monks' brewing not only sustained spiritual life, but physical life too,
a quiet safeguard in uncertain times. As the crowd thins, you help carry the remaining casks back inside the abbey. The empty cups glisten faintly in the sunlight, and the courtyard hums with the quiet satisfaction of completion. You feel a deep stillness settle over you, a sense that the long, careful labor of brewing has blossomed into something far larger than itself. Inside, the monks gather for a small meal, simple bread and cheese accompanied by a modest portion of ale. The conversation is unhurried, filled with soft laughter and thoughtful pauses. You realize that the rhythm of the monastery, its brewing, praying, and sharing, is all one continuous gesture of devotion, flowing effortlessly from contemplation to creation to compassion. Historians still debate how much of monastic brewing was driven by necessity versus charity, but the effect remains the same. Communities were nourished, travelers found rest, and faith took tangible, drinkable form. As the sun begins to sink, you help tidy the tables, wiping stray drops of ale from the wood. The faint sweetness lingers in the air, blending with the scent of evening incense drifting from the chapel. The bells ring softly for Compline, the final prayer of the day. You follow the monks through the cloisters, your footsteps echoing faintly against the worn stone. There's a quiet satisfaction in the closing of the day, in the knowledge that patience, labor, and generosity have merged seamlessly into something deeply human. You think back to every stage, the grain, the mash, the fermentation, the racking, the blending, and finally the charity, and realize that each has mirrored a human virtue: diligence, restraint, humility, harmony, and finally, charity. Brother Thomas catches your gaze as you enter the chapel. "The ale," he whispers with a knowing smile, "is only half the brew. The other half is kindness." You sit in silence as the monks begin their chant, voices rising and falling like the tide. The sound fills the chapel, soft and resonant, wrapping around you like the warmth of a shared drink. The day has ended, but the rhythm continues, the endless cycle of work, prayer, and care that defines monastic life. As the candles flicker and the final chant fades into silence, you close your eyes, feeling the calm settle in your chest. The scent of malt and beeswax lingers faintly, a reminder of the day's quiet labor and the simple grace of giving. You understand now that brewing, in its truest sense, is not just the transformation of ingredients, it's the transformation of intent, where patience becomes nourishment and devotion becomes generosity. And as the last echoes of song dissolve into silence, you sense that the ale still breathes softly in its barrels, maturing in the dark, a living reminder that even the quietest work can ripple outward into warmth, sustenance, and peace.
Morning light pours once again through the stained glass windows of the abbey, painting the walls in fractured hues of ruby and gold. Today is the day of tasting, not indulgence, not revelry, but reverence. The monks call it the sacred sip, a ritual that concludes each brewing cycle. You've walked this path before, but never with such an awareness of how every bubble, aroma, and quiet gesture ties into something far older than the monastery itself, a rhythm that connects craft, faith, and gratitude. The bell rings softly in the courtyard. The brothers gather, robes brushing the flagstones, hands folded in silence. Before them, on a simple oaken table, rest 3 clay mugs filled with the new ale. Their surfaces glisten faintly under the sunbeam that slips through the chapel's arched window. It's not a feast, nor a celebration in the worldly sense. Rather, it's a moment of stillness,
where the act of tasting becomes a meditation, a mirror to one's own patience. Brother Anselm begins with a soft prayer, his voice deep and steady. May the yeast that labored unseen remind us of unseen blessings. May the bitterness of the hops teach us balance, and may the sweetness of the malt remind us of mercy. The words are humble, rhythmic, more poem than sermon. The monks bow their heads, and for a few seconds the silence feels thick and sacred, as if time itself slows down to listen. You take your place at the end of the line, where novices usually stand. Brother Florian gives you a gentle nod, a kind of permission. When your turn comes, he hands you a mug. It's warm to the touch, alive in a way that feels oddly human. You lift it slowly, inhaling first. The aroma rises, soft malt sweetness, faint spice, and something like wildflowers caught on the wind. It's astonishing how even smell alone can carry stories of soil, labor, and weather, of the hands that tilled and stirred. The first sip lands like memory, not just taste, but texture, smooth at first, then slightly sharp at the edges, like honesty wrapped in comfort. It's both ancient and immediate, both earthy and divine. Around you, the other monks sip quietly, their faces serene. Some close their eyes, none speak. This isn't about approval or critique. It's about understanding the patience that went into creation, the cycle that led from grain to glass. Historians still debate whether such rituals had official sanction or were local traditions. Some claim they were rooted in pre-Christian seasonal rites. Others argue they were simply practical, ensuring the ale was safe before sharing it. Whatever their origin, their effect was profound. Through ritual tasting, the monks transformed daily labor into sacred practice. Brewing wasn't just work, it was worship. You watch Brother Anselm raise his cup and smile faintly. Balance, he murmurs, is the quiet soul of every brew. It's a simple sentence, yet it carries centuries of wisdom. You realize balance isn't just about ingredients, it's about the brewer's inner state. Too much haste, and fermentation falters. Too much control, and the yeast cannot breathe. The ale, like life, demands cooperation between seen and unseen forces. As you sip again, your thoughts drift beyond the monastery walls. You imagine farmers harvesting barley under the same sun that now warms your face. You picture travelers stopping by the abbey gates, weary from the road, receiving a jug of ale with gratitude. You think of villagers sharing laughter over wooden cups by firelight. In every sip, there's a whisper of connection, human, spiritual, and timeless. A quirky historical aside slips into your mind. Some monastic texts describe monks creating tasting ladders, ranking batches not just for flavor, but for devotional energy. They believed certain brews could inspire contemplation better than others, much like incense or chant. Whether literal or metaphorical, it shows how deeply intertwined faith and craft once were. Brother Florian breaks the silence with a chuckle, the kind that ripples softly through the group. "One sip for the spirit, one for the stomach," he says, eyes twinkling. The others smile, the solemnity giving way to warmth. The laughter feels earned, the release after weeks of careful brewing and waiting. Once the tasting ends, the monks don't rush to clean or disperse. They linger, wiping their mugs slowly, watching the light shift across the stone floor. The moment stretches into quiet reflection. You notice how each movement, setting down the mug, folding the cloth, returning the cup,
becomes almost liturgical, a silent prayer of gratitude through action. Historians still debate the extent to which monastic brewing influenced modern mindfulness practices, but here in this timeless hall, you can see how easy the connection is. Every step of the process, from selecting grain to washing cups, reinforces attention, patience, and gratitude. Brewing, at its essence, is an act of being fully present. Later, Brother Anselm leads you through the cloister garden. The air is crisp, scented with lavender and rosemary. Birds flicker between branches. He says, "You see, the brewing never really ends. It continues here, in how we tend the herbs, how we greet the dawn, how we listen when others speak." You realize the ale was never the final goal. It was a medium, a mirror to teach harmony with time and intention. You stop by a small wooden bench overlooking the orchard. From here, the abbey roofs shimmer in the late light, and the air hums faintly with bees. Anselm sits beside you, silent for a long moment, before saying, "Patience isn't stillness, it's moving at the right speed." You think of fermentation, invisible yet constant, the slow bubbling, the unseen transformation, the gentle pressure building quietly until readiness emerges on its own. It mirrors so much of life, grief, healing, growth. You can't rush it. You can only tend to it with care, trusting that change happens in its own rhythm. Quirky historical aside, some monastic texts refer to yeast as the living soul of the brew. Others warned against neglecting it as a careless brewer invites demons of sourness. Whether superstition or metaphor, it reveals a beautiful truth that what's alive and unseen often defines what we ultimately taste or feel. Back inside, the remaining ale is carefully stored, but one small jug is left on the communal table. Each monk pours a little into a shared bowl, then dips bread into it, a symbolic act of unity. The bread soaks up the ale's warmth, blending two sacred crafts into one humble meal. You taste it, soft, yeasty, comforting. The combination feels ancient, almost primal. Bread and ale, the twin symbols of sustenance, merge into a single expression of gratitude. You can almost hear the echo of thousands who've done the same before you. Farmers, laborers, monks, mothers, travelers, all connected through simple acts of making, waiting, and sharing. As evening deepens, the abbey falls quiet. You find yourself in the cloister corridor again, the flicker of candlelight brushing the stone walls. The air smells faintly of hops and honey. You pause, listening. Somewhere deep in the cellars, the next batch begins its slow, steady bubbling. The cycle continues. You close your eyes and breathe. For a brief moment, you feel what the monks must have felt centuries ago, that perfect stillness between effort and surrender, between making and being. You realize the sacred sip wasn't just about tasting ale. It was about tasting time itself, the distilled essence of patience, transformation, and care. Historians may argue endlessly over details, yeast strains, brewing methods, fermentation vessels. But here, standing in the quiet glow of history, it hardly matters. What remains is the rhythm, slow, deliberate, tender, that shaped not just ale, but lives.
As the candles burn low, Brother Florian passes by, smiling. "Until the next brew," he says softly. You nod, understanding that next time isn't a duty, but a promise, a continuation of a living rhythm. Outside, somewhere beyond the walls, villagers raise cups and laugh.
unaware of the patient devotion behind every drop they drink. And you, apprentice, witness, dreamer, carry within you the quiet realization that brewing, like living, is both an art and a prayer. And as the monastery sinks into stillness, so do you, breathing slower, feeling lighter, as if the sacred sip has dissolved the last traces of restlessness. You drift toward sleep, mind humming softly with gratitude, while in the cellars below, the yeast continues its eternal song of transformation.
The monastery is quiet now, the last light of day slipping softly behind the high stone walls, casting long, gentle shadows across the cloister. You sit in stillness, letting the memories of the day's labor wash over you. The golden malt, the soft hiss of fermentation, the fragrant herbs, and the slow, deliberate movements of hands guided by centuries of care. Every stage, malting, mashing, fermenting, flavoring, blending, racking, tasting, packaging, unfolded with patience, attention, and quiet reverence, a seamless rhythm that mirrors the cadence of life itself. You breathe slowly, letting the warm, earthy aromas of yeast and malt fill your senses. The soft chatter of monks fades into echoes, and even the barrels seem to exhale gently, their liquid contents resting in serene quiet. In this suspended moment, the lessons of brewing extend beyond the practical. Patience nurtures transformation, meticulous attention rewards effort, and care, even for the smallest details, creates something lasting and meaningful. You feel connected not only to the process, but to the generations of hands that have shaped it, each one moving with gentle deliberation, leaving subtle traces of devotion in every sip. The world outside the monastery may be hurried, loud, and chaotic, but here time slows. You imagine the golden ale resting in its barrels, invisible yeast at work, aromas mingling with the cool stone air, and the faint trace of herbs lingering long after the last stir. The day's labor has come full circle: creation, care, reflection, and rest. You close your eyes briefly, savoring the calm, the soft rhythm of breathing, the quiet lesson that patient, attentive work can bring both satisfaction and serenity. Now, as night deepens and the world quiets further, you allow yourself to drift with the gentle cadence of this journey. The monastery, the ale, and your own patient hands have taught you to move slowly, notice deeply, and rest fully. End of script. Sweet dreams.